Welcome to the Titan Player channel. Before we unpack today's breakdown, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into complex strategies. Okay, let's dive into this. Today we're looking at one of the most fascinating psychological and physical endurance tests ever caught on film. We're talking about a completely brutal wilderness survival challenge, pitting 5 men against 5 women for a massive, life-changing $500,000 prize. We're going to break down exactly how this entire challenge unfolded. We're stripping away all the reality TV drama to look at the raw, undeniable mechanics of survival strategy and honestly, the absolute masterclass in game theory that ultimately decided the winner. So the crucial point is the rule set, because the rules completely dictate the winning behavior here. Both teams were dropped into the woods with minimal rations and basic gear. They had a strict dividing line they literally couldn't cross. But the real game changer? A hidden twist announced shortly after they arrived. Basically, if a person leaves the challenge early, they still get their equal share of the money as long as their team is the last one standing. Furthermore, neither team would ever know how many players were left on the opposing side. That single rule completely shifted this game from a pure physical endurance test into a high-stakes game of strategic resource management.
Let's jump into Section 1, Early Divergence, covering days 1 to 9.
Right off the bat, in the very first week, the foundation for the entire challenge was laid. The two camps adopted completely opposite survival methodologies. On night 1, the women's team immediately focused on sustainable infrastructure. They built a weatherproof teepee with solid walls and secured a clean, nearby water source. More importantly, they immediately recognized that their provided food was dangerously low for 5 people. The men's camp? Well, they took a wildly different approach. They built a hasty shelter out of random twigs, treated their limited food like a free-for-all buffet with zero rationing, and were forced to burn massive amounts of calories hiking a 2-mile round trip just to gather incredibly dirty, practically undrinkable swamp water. And this brilliantly illustrates the winning mindset taking shape by just day 3. The women literally sat down, looked at their food load, and did the math. They realized it was mathematically impossible for 5 people to survive long-term on the calories they were given. So they appointed 2 members, Phaedra and Julia, as their leaders, their survival mommies, if you will, and made a conscious, team-based decision to start sending players home. Hannah volunteered to leave in a discreet vehicle, sacrificing her spot right then and there so the remaining 4 could have more food. They were playing the long game from the first 72 hours, totally optimizing their resources over their egos. Moving on to Section 2, the crucial challenges spanning days 10 to 30. To really accelerate the pressure, a head-to-head challenge was introduced every 10 days. This completely shifted the momentum of the game and started breaking players' spirits. On day 10, both teams had to elect a leader for a blind face-off. The men chose Patrick, the women chose Phaedra. The prize was a massive bag of perishable food suspended over the water, won via an archery contest. Patrick, having literally never shot an arrow in his life, missed completely. Phaedra, she takes off her jacket, steps up, and hits the target dead on. This was devastating. The women secured a huge morale and calorie boost, while the men, who were already dipping heavily into their meager rations due to bad weather, had to go back to camp entirely empty-handed. The fallout from that loss was severe. Man, it led to rapid attrition for the men's team. By day 13, the extreme lack of calories and sleep deprivation reached a breaking point, and Cam taps out. Right after that, massive torrential rainstorms slammed the forest for 2 straight days. Because the men had built that flimsy twig shelter, they were soaked to the bone. You combine that with a brutal case of poison ivy, and Josh hits his absolute limit, quitting on day 15. The men were dropping from sheer physical difficulty, whereas the women were only dropping players strategically to save food. Which leads us to a truly fascinating strategic dilemma on day 20. The challenge was simple but brutal. Eliminate yourself from the game right now, and your team gets a massive, hurricane-proof, bug-proof tent. Think about that for a second. Julia, representing the women, didn't even hesitate. She sacrificed herself immediately so Phaedra could have dry shelter. TJ, representing the men, rejected the tent. Instead, he hid at the bridge to spy, learning that Phaedra was the only woman left. Now, gathering intel is undeniably smart, but he rejected life-saving shelter for his remaining teammate Patrick, leaving them totally exposed to the elements. Let's look at Section 3, Isolation and Attrition, spanning days 30 to 40. By this point, the physical pain gives way to a severe psychological toll. The numbers had dwindled dramatically to literally just TJ, Patrick, and Phaedra. The isolation of the wilderness was really beginning to break their minds. Day 30 offered severe emotional whiplash. The players were given a choice: see their family or let their team see theirs. Since they were mostly alone anyway, they chose to see their loved ones. Patrick was deeply moved by seeing his family and swore he was staying for the long haul. But, the wilderness doesn't care about your morale. That very night, a massive bear wandered directly into the men's camp, entirely resetting the psychological board. The morning after the bear visit, Patrick delivered this incredible line of self-awareness. That bear got me realizing, I don't do outdoors. I'm a DJ. It's hilarious, but it perfectly highlights a breaking point. The absolute terror of a wild predator combined with ongoing starvation was simply too much. He gracefully bowed out, leaving TJ entirely alone with the rest of their tiny food supply. And just like that, this $500,000 challenge became a grueling one-on-one battle. Section 4, the final showdown, taking us from days 40 to 60.
The stage was now set for an epic, drawn-out psychological war between TJ and Phaedra. And this is where those earlier decisions heavily impacted the late game. Because the women intentionally self-eliminated early on, Phaedra was practically sitting on a mountain of food. She had enough calories banked to survive 80-plus days. Her only real enemy was crushing loneliness. She was literally out there talking to herself just to stay sane. TJ, on the other hand, was incredibly focused and determined, but his reality was dire. He was forced to burn precious calories hunting for snapping turtles and crawdads because his guaranteed rations were almost completely gone.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the scarcity mentality actually backfired. On day 50, both players were gifted a multi-pack of chocolate bars. Hidden on the back of one bar's wrapper was a message saying the first person to return to the bridge wins 3 extra days of food. Because TJ was starving, he strictly rationed his chocolate, saving it for days without fully opening the packages. Phaedra, who already had plenty of food, treated herself. She opened a bar immediately, found the message, and just casually strolled to the bridge to secure the massive food prize. TJ's desperation forced a rationing strategy that ironically cost him his very best chance at survival. By day 60, TJ is practically running on fumes. The challenge here was a negotiation. Write down what you want, but you only get it if your opponent approves. If one person says no, both players get nothing. Phaedra, who's just fighting boredom, asked for an art kit. TJ, fighting literal starvation, asked for a 7-day private chef. TJ approved her art kit, desperate to keep the peace. But Phaedra looked at him and ruthlessly said no. She knew his rations were expiring the very next day. Giving him a chef would artificially extend his survival. By denying him, she actively forced his endgame. That denial was the fatal blow. TJ returned to his camp, entirely depleted of food and hope. The mental toll of 60 days in isolation, combined with the stark, brutal reality of starvation, finally broke his iron will. He called in his rescue vehicle, delivering this incredibly heavy realization that he just couldn't carry the weight of his team's expectations anymore. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, the winning strategy, math over muscle. The ultimate conclusion of this challenge wasn't about who could suffer the most. It was entirely about math and resource distribution. Because the women treated the challenge as a literal math problem way back on day 3, Phaedra was able to outlast the men simply by having enough calories to sit still. And because of that hidden twist rule we talked about, every single woman on the team, including Hannah, who left on day 3, and Julia, who sacrificed herself for a tent on day 20, walked away with an equal $100,000 cut of the $500,000 prize. It's just a phenomenal lesson in team dynamics and game theory. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. Does early strategic sacrifice always beat brute endurance in the long run? Think about it. The men tried to muscle through it together and starved. The women checked their egos, shared the resources strategically from the start, and walked away rich. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, you guys. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next deep dive.